Klein's memories of the paper crane were still fresh on his mind. Back then, Wuxia had used this item to locate Dr. Aaron's astral projection and injected information into him while he was dreaming of the spirit world in his dreams. It created a revelation that evolved into a specific dream. Klein later exchanged a paper crane he had folded himself for Wuxia's and had gone above the gray fog to make a divination. He failed to gain any effective conclusions until Dr. Aaron's wife got pregnant by calculating the time, and from his understanding of the situation between a sequence 1 and sequence 0, he guessed that Wuxia was performing a cyclic restart, and he guessed that Will was in an intense battle with another snake of fate for the position of sequence 0. And the nightmare that came with the paper crane was only an auxiliary outcome. Its true purpose was to help Wuxia secretly become a fetus. What was most humorous about this matter was that the paper crane, that Klein had folded, had ended up being treated as the original from Wuxia, and the Nighthawks had used even cruder means to replicate one to swap them. Wuxia's paper crane had always been above the gray fog after I had thrown it up there. I nearly forgot about it. Performing divination on it can only gain an extremely vague revelation. If there weren't any other developments, it would be hard to infer that the child conceived by Dr. Aaron's wife was Wuxia. On the contrary, Wuxia can use it to locate it in the spirit world, just like how Wuxia can rely on the gray fog's aura to connect to the radio transceiver via the spirit world. There seems to be some possibility for this matter. Klein suddenly sat straight and had an extremely creative idea. He wanted to use the paper crane to communicate with Wuxia in a dream. This might not be of any use to me, the present me. There might even be certain hidden dangers, but if Wuxia is really the snake of fate from the life school of thought, my act of providing him with intelligence will definitely win me a favorable impression. Towards an existence at the level of a king of angels, it's necessary to make investments ahead of time. If I wait until he's really born, I might be repaid dozens of times over. Since I won't die from trying, I can still revive if I die. Although Klein had such a thought, he was in fact very cautious. He planned on divining the danger above the gray fog before deciding on executing his plan. After busying himself and confirming that the danger involved was acceptable, he used a ritual to bring back the paper crane from above the gray fog into the real world. Perhaps it was because it came from a sequence 1 snake of fate, the paper crane didn't exhibit any peculiarities from its prolonged stay above the gray fog. It remained ordinary. I hope the aura above the gray fog didn't neutralize its uniqueness, otherwise, Wuxia won't be able to locate it. The sequence before snake of fate is soothsayer. Would this matter already be within Wuxia's expectations? The reason why he chose Dr. Aaron is because he's my friend. And by doing so, he can establish a connection with me. Am I being too narcissistic? However, this question is worth suspecting. After Wuxia used the paper crane to locate Dr. Aaron, he could have directly reincarnated, so why did he repeatedly make him have nightmares? Furthermore, the dream also indicated the struggle between the snakes of fate. To an ordinary person, they would neither understand it or play a meaningful role in this matter. Isn't this like using a gaze to entice a blind person? Wuxia created the dream for me. Klein frowned slightly and had certain guesses. He suppressed his puzzlement and picked up a fountain pen. As he filled it with ink, he considered a sentence to leave on the paper crane to garner Wuxia's attention. What should I write? Klein recalled what Rhodes had informed him about the situation with the life school of thought, and he felt that there was one line that could encompass everything while feeling extremely fresh and filled with emotions. That line was, "Your home blew up." This sentence is overly crude and direct while lacking manners. Besides, Wuxia might not be the president of the life school of thought. Klein deliberated and slightly spread open the paper crane. On the different surfaces, he wrote different words that formed a very short sentence: Roy King has been captured. After doing all of this, Klein put down the fountain pen and placed the paper crane into his wallet, just like Dr. Aaron had done before. In the periphery of the Roarsted Sea, on a gigantic fog-covered island far from the main sea routes. Amidst a shrill cry, a blue bird of prey that resembled a shadow had plummeted from the sky and crashed heavily into the ground. It sent soil scattering as its blood splattered. Alger Wilson remained cautious. He stood far away and raised his left hand, which had an iron-black ring on his thumb. He pointed it at the terrifying beyonder creature known as a blue shadow falcon. On the tip of the ring was a spike-like protrusion. It was tainted with old blood, looking ancient and sinister. This was the mystical item he had bought from an artisan, using Steel Mavadi's bounty. He publicly claimed that it cost him £5,200 despite it actually only costing £3,100. The ring's name was Whip of Mind. It could deliver irresistible intense mental damage to an enemy. Apart from that, it could strengthen Alger's mastery of various weapons. Therefore, it wasn't actually very expensive. Back then, the artisan and his friend had two mystical items. One was the Whip of Mind and the other was the Ring of Witchcraft. The latter had more abilities and high adaptability while costing almost the same as the former. It was a better choice, but after serious consideration, Alger still chose the Whip of Mind. He believed that without such an item, his hunting of the blue shadow falcon would be several times more difficult. This was because it was a beyonder creature that could fly. And reality had proven that his judgment was right. For this, Alger was willing to experience a constant headache, a nagging feeling that made him want to slam his head into a wall. After waiting for several minutes, he saw points of light float up from the blue shadow falcon. 6 crystalline feathers condensed around its wing as Alger heaved a sigh of relief and walked over. He had a flaxen cloth tied around his forehead, and embedded inside it was a blood-red gem that emitted a light that resembled the moonlight. This was meant to be the vampire baron inheritance for Emlyn White, but Alger wasn't in a hurry to complete the transaction. After obtaining it instead, he used the characteristic, which he could use to a certain extent, to add insurance to his hunt for the blue shadow falcon. At times, being a middleman is rather nice. Alger put away the 6 crystalline feathers as he sighed silently. He straightened his body and looked towards the towering mountain peak and dense forest around it on the primitive island. He felt that many indescribable dangers lurked there. My strength is insufficient to explore the area. Alger retracted his gaze and walked towards the island's periphery, constantly wary for any predators around him. Soon, he jumped into the sea, and with his powers as a seafarer, he easily swam into the distance. His ghost ship was anchored there, and his sailors were still sleeping thanks to the sanguine's anesthetic gas. To come to this primitive island, the ship had to steer away from the main sea routes. In a situation where sea monsters lurked while the storms lingered, navigating would take at least 6 hours, with the danger of sinking at any moment. Only a seafarer who was familiar with the route could bring the ship close. Deep into the night, Klein, who had rested an entire day, put down his newspapers and burrowed into bed. Just as he was about to fall asleep, he suddenly thought of a problem. Now that Danitz has returned to the Golden Dream, would it be a waste for me to stay in a large suite alone? Klein nodded indiscernibly and decided to check out at daybreak and switch to another inn. After making up his mind, he quickly fell asleep. Suddenly, his mind became clear from its prior haziness. He knew that some force had intruded into his dream. I'm very impressive to be able to sense the dream intrusion of a snake of fate. No, the gray fog is very impressive. Klein surveyed his surroundings and discovered that he was located in a pitch-black desolate plain. Not far away was a black steeple. This was a scene he had formerly seen in Dr. Aaron's dream, but at this moment, there wasn't a mysterious silver giant snake on the steeple. Klein nodded in thought as he sped up his pace and entered the pitch-black steeple. It remained ancient and decadent. The layout was chaotic, with the staircase occasionally spiraling upwards and dropping downwards diagonally at times. Some of the rooms were normal, others were upside down, and there were others that were embedded into other parts. Passing through, door after door and wall after wall, Klein once again arrived deep inside the Black Tower. There were tarot cards scattered around here as they clustered towards the ground in the middle, which was slightly protruded. There was a line of silver words and a portrait. The portrait was that of the chubby apothecary, and the silver words formed the sentence, "Inform Dark Will." So the chubby apothecary's name is Dark Will. Will Auceptin really is the snake of fate from the life school of thought. And I really can use the paper crane to communicate with him in a dream. Klein waited for a moment, and seeing that there weren't any other revelations, he exited the dream and fell asleep again. After daybreak, Klein asked if there weren't any additional charges for checking out at noon. He then put on his top hat and rode a carriage to the Red Theater's entrance. This famous brothel was in its quietest period of the day. It was like it was a ghost house. Klein glanced at it before walking diagonally across to the alley and arriving outside Darkwill's folk herb store. He suddenly sensed something as he looked up at the roof, and he saw a fat owl perched there, looking at him. The chubby apothecary was apparently attempting to tame a beyonder animal before. Klein retracted his gaze in thought as he knocked on the door. Thump. 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 After waiting for a while, he saw Darkwill open the door with his eyes hardly open. "You aren't sick," Darkwill said after observing him. Klein maintained Gehrman Sparrow's cold expression and politely widened the corners of his mouth. "Good morning, Mr. Apothecary. I found your teacher." "For real?" Darkwill asked in disbelief. "You just received the mission the day before yesterday." "What has me receiving the mission the day before yesterday have to do with when I find him? If I didn't need to spend a day waiting for the snake of fate, Will Auceptin, to locate me, I could have done so 24 hours earlier. That's what professionalism is." Klein answered calmly, "You can choose not to hear what I have to say." Darkwill choked back the words he had prepared as his facial muscles twitched. "Go ahead and say it," Klein described flatly. "I received intel that Roy King has been captured by the military and is presently imprisoned in the Governor General's office." "News I received from a Rhodes," he added inwardly. "For real?" Darkwill couldn't hold back again as he widened his eyes and blurted out a retort. Klein nodded indiscernibly and said, "My information source is sufficiently reliable. But I have no way of confirming it." Darkwill said in hesitation. "This is because it involves an important sealed artifact of the life school of thought," Klein said directly. Darkwill immediately jumped in fright as he took 2 steps back and looked around warily, afraid that someone had heard what Klein had just said. "Can this sort of thing be said out on the street? He knows that we're from the life school of thought, and he knows that old man is involved in an important sealed artifact. I only learned of that from my last communication with him." Darkwill gradually began to believe the adventurer in front of him. Klein swept a glance at the owl who swooped down and landed on the chubby apothecary's shoulder. "You can make your payment, I can't confirm it. I can't just believe what you say, right?" Darkwill said stubbornly. Then, he saw the eyes of the adventurer in front of him turn abnormally cold. He trembled and hurriedly said, "All right, I'll barely count it as you completing the mission." Unwillingly, he took out a wad of cash from a secret pocket in his witch doctor robes and handed Klein 100 pounds in change. Although he was a beyonder, the physical enhancements he obtained from his job as an apothecary and beast tamer wasn't enough to play a role in direct combat. He wasn't necessarily able to defeat an ordinary person with a revolver. As for the beyonder pet he reared, it was also a fellow without any combat powers. Faced with an experienced and resourceful adventurer who was also likely a beyonder, both he and the owl together wasn't necessarily his match. All he could do was act as he said. It wasn't easy saving up that amount of money, he lamented inwardly. It was indeed profitable being an apothecary, even more so when out in the colonies. There were pirates, sailors, and adventurers. There were all sorts of people, and the official organizations were more relaxed on enforcing the rules. He could sell certain banned medicine without anyone coming to knock at his door. For the past 2 months, just the customers from the Red Theater was enough to earn him more than what he previously earned in a year. However, as a beyonder, his expenses were huge as well. The savings he had primarily been expended when advancing to beast tamer. Later, he reared a pet and, with great difficulty, bought the potion formula and ingredients for it. He also purchased defensive charms for himself, leaving him only a few £100 in savings. Klein received the cash and, while counting it, verified their authenticity before putting it in his pocket and leaving. After seeing Klein's figure disappear from the alley, Darkwill's expression sank. "It's too dangerous here. Too dangerous. I have to leave as quickly as possible." As he mumbled, he returned inside his herb store. Once inside, he dragged a brown suitcase and quickly stuffed all sorts of clothes and cash which had been folded neatly into it. Finally, he poured out the notes and coins of different denominations from the cash register, stuffed them into his pocket, and took the fake identification documents he had spent a fortune on. With the brown suitcase, he walked out of his folk herb store. Looking back at the various medicinal ingredients he hadn't finished selling yet, Darkwill's chubby face clearly twitched. He took a breath and locked the door while resisting his aching heart. He went straight for the harbor by getting a rental carriage, heading for Byam's liner ticketing company. "It's too dangerous, way too dangerous. Old man has been caught. He's been caught." He sat in the carriage and repeated himself silently as he trembled. In this state, he finally arrived at the ticketing company, and after paying for the carriage, he rushed into the lobby and queued up for the liner to East Balam. Phew. Phew. Darkwill kept taking a few deep breaths as he closely followed the customer ahead of him and shifted forward. "Get me the first ship out of here," he emphasized to himself. As he sporadically inched forward, Darkwill finally calmed down. His expression occasionally turned twisted before quickly calming down. This repeated numerous times. When there was only one customer left in front of him, Darkwill paused on the spot. "Dumbass. You dumbass." He cursed himself and immediately turned around, carried his suitcase, and walked out the ticketing lobby with his identification documents. Klein didn't care how Darkwill was saving his teacher, Roy King. He believed that it wasn't something that needed his concern. They have the life school of thought backing them. Even if they recently fractured, they're an ancient organization that was born in the early 5th epoch, making it have hundreds of years of history. It has a considerable heritage. Chubby Apothecary will naturally be able to find someone to help. If even the life school of thought can't do it, it will be useless even if I get the entire tarot club to help. So there's no need for me to worry for him. The military in Byam has a demigod. Of course, he might not be in the Governor General's office and might be in the military base. Inside the carriage, Klein took out his wallet and looked at the paper crane in it, wondering if he should immediately throw it above the grey fog. "I'll wait longer. Perhaps that snake of fate, Will Oseptin, might want to give me some perks. I should prepare a pencil next time. I neglected a problem. A paper crane is only this big. Using a fountain pen will quickly leave it without space to write. That will make me unable to contact Will Oseptin and end up just waiting passively. And I can't keep the paper crane on me all day. In a few days, I'll send it back to the junk pile above the grey fog. After all, I cannot always have Will Oseptin tracking me. I have to be careful." Klein quickly made a decision and returned to the Wind of Azure Inn, packed his suitcase, and checked out of the luxurious suite. To his delight, on Danet's second time here, he had made a prepayment, making him responsible for the 5 solely in fees. Soon, Klein switched to a different district and came to Odom Street, which was close to Amiris Leaf Bar. He stayed in an inn called Tiana. He got a clean and simple room which cost him 2 solely 2 pence every day. There was also a complimentary cup of fruit juice squeezed from the gigantic fruit named Tiana. As he drank the slightly sweet milky fruit juice, Klein no longer cared about his image. He slumped into a reclining chair and decided to daze off and take a nap for the next 2 hours before going above the grey fog to browse through the prayers of his believers to experience the different facades people have. Backlund, the White Family. Emlyn looked at the blood-red gem that appeared in front of him at the altar, and he seemed to be able to hear it resonating with his blood. After thanking Mr. Fool, he picked up the gem and felt the uniqueness flowing within it, so as to confirm that it was the inheritance from a sanguine baron. As long as I prepare the corresponding inheritance ritual and supplementary ingredients, I'll become a baron. And this isn't difficult at this stage, Emlyn thought with anticipation and glee. According to the human system, I would be a sequence 6 Beyonder. The corresponding name is Potions Professor. In the blink of an eye, it was Monday again. Above the fog sea, a fleet was tearing through the thin fog and blue sea. Their flagship was a gigantic sailboat which hung a unique flag on it. It depicted an eyelashless eye with 10 stars surrounding it. Admiral of Stars Catlia stood by the window of the captain's cabin as she quietly looked at the sunlight that shone through the thin fog until the wall clock produced its cuckoo. She glanced at the time and quickly converted the time to lone time. She then pulled the curtains and sat behind her desk. Placed on the red wooden table were a brass sextant and a light blue celestial globe. The latter's surface had a large swath of blankness, regions that hadn't been explored or were impossible to explore. Cadlia reached out her fingers and played with the celestial globe before closing her eyes as she awaited the fool's summoning. Before long, a crimson light flooded her eyes, drowning the prepared her completely. By the time she got used to the changes, she found herself in the holy palace propped up with stone columns. She was before a long, mottled bronze table. While Miss Justice was greeting everyone energetically, Catlia also expressed her respects to Mr. Fool, who was still covered in the grayish-white fog. She did a simple sweep, and her black eyes with a slight tinge of purple suddenly constricted. She realized that the hanged man, the moon, and the sun who were sitting opposite her had slight changes in their outward spirituality. It was different from before. This indicated that they had advanced. This meant that they had advanced in the past few days. In just a week, 3 Tarot Club members have advanced. It's likely that the hanged man and the moon have already reached sequence 6. Is this a coincidence? They happen to consume the potion this week. In terms of probability, there's a possibility. The moon and the sun were purchasing ingredients last week, but this also serves to show that the Tarot Club members advance very quickly, otherwise, there wouldn't be such a coincidence. Of course, it's not strange to advance quickly below sequence 5 once a Beyonder masters the acting method and isn't lacking in resources. From sequence 6 to sequence 5, there's a need for a ritual, and the digestion becomes increasingly difficult. It's difficult for such matters to happen again. Cadlia retracted her gaze. Following that, Audrey apologized to Mr. Fool, saying that she hadn't been in contact with the psychology alchemists recently and wasn't able to provide any Roselle diary pages. Furs was in a similar situation. Her teacher was slow in replying to her, and the cold weather outside left her resistant against the idea of heading out. Having just advanced and having many things to settle, Derek wasn't able to produce new ancient myths. Klein could only calmly nod. Upon seeing this, Derek heaved a sigh of relief and turned his head to the other end of the long bronze table. Mr. World, I've obtained the method for separating a Beyonder characteristic from the mental corruption left by a rampager. Don't say it so directly. At the other end of the bronze table, Klein's expression nearly froze. Little son, although you have promised several times in the past, making Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man know of this matter, can't you see that Ma'am Hermit just joined? Klein resisted the urge to facepalm. The method for separating a rampager's mental corruption from a Beyonder characteristic. The hermit Catlia shot a glance at the world and guessed that he might have obtained 1 to 2 Beyonder characteristics that a rampager left behind. In addition, one of them likely involved the advancement characteristic for the world or someone close to him. This was a very easy inference, since if one didn't use a Beyonder characteristic as the main ingredient of a potion, the mental corruption of a rampager, and it didn't matter if it was made into a mystical item. At worst, the negative side effects would be extremely strong, making it equivalent to a sealed artifact, but that didn't mean that there was no way of using it. After adjusting his emotions, Klein controlled the world to answer hoarsely, write it on a piece of paper and pass it to me. With that said, Klein originally wished to encourage Little Sun for being a trustworthy person, but upon considering how the world's image was that of a gloomy and reserved person who didn't say anything else unless he had ulterior motives, he instantly fell into a slight dilemma. No, there's an ulterior motive. By letting Little Sun maintain his principles, it will make things a lot easier in the future. To put it simply, it will be easier to fleece him. Of course, I'll have to suffer the damage from his honesty and uprightness as a result. The world is an experienced and shrewd beyonder in the eyes of Miss Justice, Mr. Hanged Man, and the others. They likely wouldn't notice any problems. Klein's mind raced as he made the world let out a deep laugh. You're really a trustworthy person. Your character is worthy of praise. The Hanged Man pricked up his brows and took the initiative to say to Derek, I'm also interested in the knowledge regarding this. What can I use to trade for this information? He planned to do the transaction if it wasn't too expensive, and he would give up if it exceeded his expectations. After all, he didn't have any use for it at the moment. Having been praised, Derek was still lost in his joy. After 2 seconds of thought, he said with abnormal sincerity, Mr. Hanged Man, there's no need. You've often been giving me suggestions in the past when I was faced with trials. Just treat it as a way of showing my appreciation. If the world is a real person and was drinking, he definitely would have spewed out all the water in his mouth. Thankfully, he's neither drinking, nor is he real. Klein mustered all the beyonder powers of a clown to ensure his expression remained unchanged. The Hanged Man was briefly at a loss for words. The Sun's reply was completely out of his expectations. He had been traveling the seas for years and had experienced numerous encounters. His outlook on things was no longer that of black and white, with it mainly shades of gray. At this moment, he felt a baffling sense of guilt. Your character is really worthy of praise. Alger quickly composed himself and praised Little Sunday. Don't copy what I said. Can't you use a different sentence? The world glanced at the Hanged Man as the fool lamented how wily old foxes were all one and the same. Dumbass. No, he's dumber than an ass. A dumb sheep. The moon Emlyn silently condemned the sun. From this morning, he had been filled with anticipation for this tarot gathering, as he had already advanced to Baron and had wished to find a chance to covertly flaunt himself. They might not be able to tell, apart from Mr. Fool. Mr. Hanged Man likely can guess it. I should do something later to let them know that I'm an honorable Lord Baron. Emlyn pondered as he listened. Towards Little Sun's words, Justice Audrey didn't feel any guilt or anger, as she knew very well that Mr. Hanged Man had been the one who had been guiding him every time. The others were only occasionally giving suggestions. This is the natural result of being a good person. I hope Mr. Hanged Man will become kinder in the future. She watched this scene in delight and didn't have the urge to spend money to obtain the method for separating the mental corruption from a beyonder characteristic. Derek quickly turned around and obtained Mr. Fool's approval and conjured 2 yellowish-brown goatskin parchments. Klein controlled the world and took a piece. He scanned it impatiently. There are 2 methods. The first is to use an item that can steal the beyonder powers of others. Extract the mental corruption left behind by a rampager and concoct the beyonder characteristic into a potion before the theft loses effect. This way, the mental corruption will have nowhere to go and will directly dissipate. The second is to hold a ritual and pray to one of the 2 mystical items in our City of Silver. Use its feedback to shatter the beyonder characteristic and let the mental corruption expire. After that, the beyonder characteristic will automatically gather together slowly. I only managed to obtain the corresponding ritual's procedure and was unable to obtain the precise description of the item. Only the elders of the 6-member council have the right to know it and preside over such a ritual. The ritual's procedure is... Thoughts went through Klein's mind as he nearly forgot to control the dummy, the world. The first method is indeed something I never considered before. The sealed artifact, Blood Vessel Thief, behind the Chinese gate in Tianjin City is able to steal a target's beyond her powers. By viewing a mental corruption as one of them, there's nothing wrong with this logic. But here comes the problem. The mental corruption inside the all-black eye isn't that of an ordinary beyonder but from the evil god, true creator. Regardless of if it's the beyonder who's stealing the power or a mystical item of a similar trait, it will not be able to withstand such mental corruption. The former has a 100% chance of losing control, while the latter will directly be corrupted. In theory, I can sacrifice a similar mystical item and use it to replace the all-black eye's corruption. However, the timing has to be done perfectly without any errors, otherwise, the two items might end up corrupted. Klein quickly analyzed the viability of the first option. As for the second option, it was similar to his and Edwina's previous guess. Only the details were somewhat different. The two powerful mystical items in the City of Silver are, at best, grade 0. Basically, it can't be a true god sequence 0 remains, otherwise, they wouldn't be in such a pathetic state in the forsaken land of the gods. Therefore, does it mean that in order to shatter a beyonder characteristic, one doesn't need a god's strength? It's enough to do it at the level of an angel. According to Little Sun, an angel is equivalent to a subsidiary god and can barely be considered a god. Yes. This matter can be verified. See, God Calvetua only obtained a portion of Calamity Kohinum's characteristic. The remaining part is in the Book of Calamity. There might even be a third part. I wonder where it's hidden, since it helps this high elf, at the level of an angel, be able to resist death. In short, it can be seen that Kohinum's beyonder characteristic was split into at least two parts. This is essentially the same as shattering a beyonder characteristic. With all the evidence validating each other, I can make a preliminary conclusion that as long as the ritual is right, the feedback of a powerhouse at the angel level will be able to shatter a beyonder characteristic. Then, here comes the problem. Where do I find an angel? Mr. Azik might be one at his peak, but he clearly hasn't recovered yet. As for saints, Snake of Fate, Will Oseptin, is only a fetus that hasn't even been born at the moment. Klein didn't spend too much time thinking, deciding to consider how to resolve the problem after the tarot gathering ended. With that, Alger quickly scanned the area and gained an understanding to a certain degree. Towards this, he had a theory. Getting the world to seek the method to separate the mental corruption from a beyonder characteristic is likely a test Mr. Fool had given to his blessed. But does this imply that Mr. Fool's strength has only recovered to the level of a saint and not an angel? Otherwise, there's no need to go through such trouble. He could have directly removed it. How long has it been? It's just been 7 months and Mr. Fool has already recovered to this extent. Right, he can already respond in place of Sea God Calvetua. In another 1 to 2 years, he will likely be able to escape from his seal. Standing at the pinnacle as an angel, he will just be one step short of the ultimate goal. Ignoring the hanged man's reaction, Catlia looked at the hanged man and thought for a few seconds before chuckling. I'm not sure if those methods include one of the methods I know of. I can provide it for free. An unshadowed of the sun pathway can directly cleanse away the mental corruption in a beyonder characteristic. Ma'am Hermit is a lot more proactive than the last time. Has she adjusted her state of mind, or does she have a motive? Or could it be that she's discovered that everyone else is a weakling, so there's no need to be too careful? Klein was first surprised with Catlia's attitude before being delighted that he had obtained a third method. It was from the sun pathway which the City of Silver lacked. But I can't find the help of an unshadowed, although I do have an incomplete unshadowed potion formula. He controlled the world to deliberate for a moment before having him turn to Catlia to laugh deeply. Thank you for your generosity, Ma'am Hermit. Following that, he switched to the demeanor of a salesman and asked Derek, do you know of a book named Groselle's Travels? Derek thought seriously before honestly shaking his head. No. No. Klein nearly failed to continue what he had to say, but thankfully, he steadied himself and let the world explain himself. It's a magical book that originates from dragons. Many of its owners have vanished. Originates from dragons? Audrey keenly noticed this important point as she asked with interest. Yes, a Beyonder plans on selling it for £8,000, the World said hoarsely. He didn't raise the price above Edwina's offer because he had yet to bargain with her. This was where he could profit on the trade. Besides, even if Edwina insisted on £8,000, he could still obtain Grosel's travels and study it. It was worth the time he spent closing the deal. Audrey pursed her lips slightly as she darted her eyes around a little and cautiously asked, "What's so magical about it?" "It requires further study." The World chose to be honest. "I'll consider it." Audrey wasn't in a hurry to agree to it because £8,000 was also a considerable sum of money to her as well. Especially with her having just been reimbursed for lie, it was very difficult for her father, Earl Hall, to accept a book of unknown purpose. And if she were to rely on herself, it would take her at least 3 to 4 months. This was built on the premise that she had already purchased the psychiatrist's Beyonder characteristic for Susie. Hence, she turned to ask the World about the psychiatrist Beyonder characteristic. "I mainly spent this week hunting Vice Admiral Ailment and failed. I didn't find a grazing target to switch to." Klein was instantly left somewhat embarrassed, feeling as though the World's shrewd image had been damaged. Thankfully, the World didn't have the ability to blush red. As long as he wasn't controlled, there was no change to his state. He chuckled darkly. Another few more days. Audrey nodded with a reserved attitude and didn't rush him. This was because Susie didn't express any desire in advancing any time soon. After all, she was only a dog. The Hanged Man, the Moon, and the Sun had just advanced a few days ago, so they were in the stage of converging their spirituality and practicing their new Beyonder powers. They had no desire to purchase the subsequent potion formulas or corresponding sanguine inheritance. They calmly waited until the transaction phase came to an end. Besides, they didn't have spare cash. Although Alger had lowered the price Emlyn White had to pay for the Sanguine Baron inheritance to £3 and £300 in commission, allowing him to earn £1,400, he had spent quite a bit on the whip of mind. All he had left was £1,445. After purchasing the Sanguine Baron inheritance, new dolls, and doll dresses, he still had £2,300 in savings. Although it seemed like a sizable amount, the subsequent ingredients were that of a Sanguine Viscount. It would cost at least £8,000. As for Derek, he had exchanged all his merit points that he had previously accumulated, and he was waiting to be sent out for a patrolling or exploration mission. Furs and Audrey were similarly not seeking to purchase the potion formulas of the subsequent sequences since they could obtain them from their own resource channels. Furthermore, there was no need to hide it or waste money at the Tarot Club. Audrey simply wasn't too nitpicky when it came to money. It didn't mean she was dumb. On the other hand, Cadlia was still observing and wasn't in a rush to reveal what she needed. On the other hand, she didn't believe that the other Tarot Club members apart from Mr. Fool could provide anything she needed. After all, to a pirate admiral who had advanced to Sequence 5 for years, what she desired most was the level of demigod. Therefore, she only looked calmly at the Sun and the others, with her slightly dark purple eyes, and without making any attempts at speaking. Klein thought for a moment and controlled the World to add, "Is anyone able to obtain a mystical item with very potent offensive strength?" The target of his question was directed at the hermit. This was because only Admiral of Stars, who had traveled the seas for so many years, could satisfy his request. Even the Hanged Man and that artisan he knew couldn't do it unless he could provide them with a corresponding Sequence 6 or even a Sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic. Cadlia fell silent for 2 seconds before slowly shaking her head. "If something similar appears at the Beyonder gatherings I participate in, I'll help you take note." All these years, she had killed several Beyonders and had indeed obtained a certain number of Beyonder characteristics and mystical items, but they were either rewarded to her pirate subordinates, or she had exchanged them for 2 powerful items that greatly enhanced her strength and survivability. She didn't have anything to spare. Furthermore, she needed the 2 items and wouldn't sell them before she advanced to the level of demigod. From the looks of it, Admiral of Stars isn't a to-do person either. A huge faction implies large expenses. Klein silently sighed and made the world thank her with his hoarse voice. With the transactions quickly coming to an end, he controlled the world to look at Furs. I wish to entrust you with a mission. Me? Furs was a little surprised. Could it be something like buying a radio transceiver again? She thought as the corners of her mouth twitched slightly. The world nodded. Go to William Street, which borders West Borough and Empress Borough, and circle the place. Do it once every 2 to 3 days. Take note of any abnormalities. If there are any, then inform me immediately. He didn't use Mr. Fool to bring focus on the matter, as everyone was already used to it and experienced. Furthermore, beneath William Street was precisely the location of the Tudor family's ruins where the evil spirit was lingering. Abnormality? What would be considered abnormal? Furs asked, feeling puzzled and cautious. There might be something abnormal about William Street in Backlund. Audrey was originally not very interested in the topic, but at that moment, she pricked up her ears and paid close attention. She trusted Mr. World's ability to gather intelligence to a great extent. The great smog of Backlund was evidence of his ability. West Borough, Empress Borough. Sounds like it's located at Loan's capital, Backlund. Miss Magician is presently in Backlund. Indeed. She looks ordinary, but she isn't in any way. To a secret organization, members in a city are often more powerful in other places. Of course, she might also be like me, a coincidence of fate because she requested to be roped in. Cadlia swept a glance at Furs and quickly analyzed the information revealed from the conversation. Alger was suddenly interested since he knew that the world was the representative of Mr. Fool's Blessed. Whatever he paid attention to had a high chance of involving a conflict at the upper echelons. Just what secret lies within that street named William Street? Alger couldn't help but try to guess at the deeper truth. How would I know what abnormalities there will be? Klein mumbled before getting the world to answer gloomily, I believe there will be sufficient abnormalities. I have to warn you that if you really notice anything abnormal, do not attempt to investigate it on your own or hire someone to do the investigation. It will be very dangerous. How much do you think is an adequate reward? Very dangerous. Furs instinctively wished to decline the mission. However, considering how immense the influence of the great smog of Backlund was, one that even affected her, she wasn't sure if this abnormality wouldn't cause her harm. As such, she became hesitant. After a few seconds, she changed her languid seating posture and said, 100 pounds. Much lower than I imagined. The world chuckled. Furs spread her hands and said, it's because it's for myself as well. I'll just treat it as people observation in order to gather material for my novel. That's right, I can't stay at home all day. It's time for me to get out. I have to push forward the matter of acting as a trickmaster. Just conjuring tricks to amuse Zio isn't enough to digest it. How should I act? Join a circus to perform tricks? Or should I do individual performances at different squares? I don't have to be worried about how the people I know view me. As an author, life experience is a basic trait. Furza's thoughts gradually dispersed. After settling this matter, Klein made the world turn his head to the hanged man and chuckle darkly. I received intel that the Church of Storms has taken action. The matter at Bansi Harbor has been preliminarily resolved. Having been drifting out at sea for the past week, Alger, who hadn't had any contact with the church, immediately replied with a solemn voice, what's the final outcome? There won't be a Bansi Harbor for some time, the world replied with a concealed smile. At this moment, Audrey and company realized what they were talking about. That was the place with the ancient name Binzi, and it had the present name of Bansi. It was the place where descendants of the King of Angels Medici resided. Is Mr. World implying that the Church of Storms has leveled Bansi Harbor? That's really in their style. That's good too. There's no need to worry that the innocent there will be corrupted. I wonder if the King of Angels Medici appeared or escaped. Would the Pontiff of the Church of Storms appear in person, or was a Grade 0 sealed artifact used? Audrey heaved a sigh of relief as she asked with brightened eyes, Mr. World, do you know of the specifics? No, no one knows, other than the upper echelons of the Church of Storms. The World stole a glance at the hanged man. The hanged man fell silent, feeling the burning ambition in his chest once more. I want to become a member of the Church's upper echelons. He emphasized to himself. The hermit Catlia, who had joined the tarot gathering a second time, basically didn't understand what they were talking about. As a pirate admiral, she was no stranger to Bansi Harbor, but she didn't know what had happened there. She also had no idea why the Church of Storms would destroy the place and why it would require a long period of time to rebuild it. It should be a very serious matter that deals with the higher-ups. The members of the Tarot Club seems to be aware of the reason. Although their sequences aren't high, they seem to know a lot and are involved in many matters, apart from the sun. This is the reason why Mr. Fool tacitly agreed to have them establish this gathering. Through the Tarot Club, they will indirectly influence various matters of different organizations. Cadlia once again re-evaluated her understanding of the other members and was increasingly impressed with them. She still maintained her silence and didn't inquire. This left Audrey, who was waiting to flaunt via answering in response to the hermit's puzzlement, disappointed. Even for Ma'am Hermit, it's unlikely that she'll be involved in matters regarding a King of Angels. No, she might not even know about the existence of a King of Angels. Audrey thought spontaneously. After talking about the outcome of Bansi Harbor and waiting for a moment, Emlyn White immediately cleared his throat and said, thanks to Mr. Hanged Man's help, I'm already a baron. I have a question. As a sanguine, do I need to use the acting method like you humans do in order to expedite the so-called digestion after advancing to a baron, so as to better grasp the beyonder characteristic? His back was extremely sharp as his neck was slightly elevated while his chin was slightly tipped upwards. I'm sorry. Mr. Fool isn't able to answer this question of yours. But in theory, it's required. After all, you are using the inheritance of others. Klein leaned back in his chair and sat amidst the grey fog as he leisurely looked at the other members of the Tarot Club. Cadlia scanned her surroundings and said, a sanguine baron corresponds to the sequence 6 potions, Professor. Yes, Emlyn replied, unable to hide his smile. He wasn't stupid. From the previous transactions and interactions, he had determined the sequences of the other members apart from the world. He believed that he was one of the strongest members of the Tarot Club. Of course, this was excluding Mr. Fool and the recently recruited Ma'am Hermit. Mr. Moon is already at sequence 6. Why does he seem more immature than the sun? Audrey pursed her lips. At that moment, Cadlia said, it requires acting because this pathway only has the name vampire at sequence 7. As for you, you were born in that state. There's no need to act, but it's required for the other sequences. Ma'am Hermit, which pathway does that sequence 7 belong to? Audrey blinked her eyes as she curiously asked before Emlyn White could say a word. Without waiting for the hermit to answer, Audrey added, if you believe this is an important piece of information and isn't something to be given for free, then I can provide you with some payment. No, there's no need to. Anyone familiar with the Faina Potter's Church of Earth Mother will have some understanding of this. Cadlia didn't doubt Miss Justice's sincerity when it came to the principle of equal exchange. She believed that Miss Justice was fully capable of satisfying her price in terms of wealth and resources, but she decided to provide the information for free. Firstly, it raised Miss Justice's impression on her and would build a foundation for any future transactions. Secondly, by providing the information, she could observe the reactions of the members and estimate their standing in their own organizations and factions. I'm very familiar with the Earth Mother's blessed, Bishop Yutravsky, but I didn't know anything about that. Of course, I truly am a little scared of him. His height and build are just too intimidating. Every time I'm there, I only seek out Emlyn White. Sitting at the end of the long bronze table, Klein thought in a self-deprecating manner. Cadlia didn't pause as she continued, vampire is from the moon pathway. The corresponding sequence 9 is apothecary, sequence 8 is beast tamer, sequence 6 is potions professor, sequence 5 is scarlet scholar, sequence 4 is shaman king. I'm not sure about the higher sequences. Ahem. Emlyn White coughed. Ma'am Hermit, I have to emphasize that it's sanguine, not vampire. Heh, I won't object it if you call those humans who consume the characteristics of my kinsmen vampires. I would even be very agreeable to it, so vampire is from the apothecary pathway. So is shaman king. It's no wonder they revere the primordial moon and not the goddess. Could the scarlet lunar corona, that Ma'am Sharon obtained, be from a dead scarlet scholar or sanguine viscount? Apart from being able to recreate the effects of a full moon and neutralizing the corresponding effects, it can provide terrifying speed, unimaginable recovery speed, and rather powerful darkness-related spells. The negative effects can be neutralized by drinking the fresh blood of the living. Indeed, it does seem to be a result of a sanguine. Among the various jobs of this pathway, there are some that resemble the seer pathway. There's no connection between the sequences, while there are some that have an obvious progression. How strange. Klein joined the bits of bread crumbs together, feeling somewhat enlightened and puzzled. Alger, Furs, and company were either in thought, listening in relish, or pretending to be disinterested. Everyone had different reactions, but Cadlia was able to figure out that they didn't understand much about vampires prior to this. They are low or mid-ranking members in their organizations or factions. They match the characteristics of being recently pulled into the Tarot Club and at the stage of rapidly advancing. The world didn't react either. He's very staid, or he long knew of the matter regarding vampires, or both. After repeated observations, I have to admit that the world is the Tarot Club member that needs to have the most attention paid to and be guarded against. Audrey listened with great interest as she thought over it carefully. As though she was attending a family education class, she raised her hand slightly. Ma'am Hermit, why are the sequences in the moon pathway seemingly unrelated? The hermit Cadlia looked at Miss Justice and discovered that the dress and accessories she wore were completely different from the last gathering. There was no repeat, but it exuded her luxurious and noble bearing. As her mind went adrift, she seemed to see the portrait of the queen back when she was young. Every piece of clothing she wore was completely different. The same set of clothing was never worn a second time at a formal event. After a moment of silence, Cadlia said, a pathway's sequence doesn't necessarily need to be related or superficially connected. The common trait is that this pathway corresponds to the god's domain. For example, the moon represents spirituality, plants, beauty, parts of life, parts of darkness, and parts of mystery. Therefore, this pathway has apothecary of the plant domain, vampire of the life domain, and beast tamer of the intersection of life and spirituality. Sanguine. Emlyn White emphasized and lifted his chin slightly. This should be why us sanguine are very handsome and beautiful. No, that's not the case. The vampires I've seen are all disgusting and ferocious. Derek retorted weakly in his heart. It can be explained in such a manner. It's quite different from Captain's and Daly's explanations. Different pathways represent the domain possessed by a sequence 0. Or could it be that the two combined is the most accurate answer? I wonder what the domains the sequence 0 of the seer pathway represents. From the symbol behind my chair, it represents strangeness and change. Klein's expression didn't change as his mind whirled. Audrey easily understood Ma'am Hermit's explanation and couldn't help but guess the name of her pathway's sequence 0. It's definitely dragon. There are many species of dragons. Many powers are not contained within this pathway. It's closer to the domain represented by the mind dragon. I wish Mr. Fool can quickly find the card of blasphemy of this corresponding pathway. That Grozel's travels originates from dragons. I wonder if it has anything to do with a mind dragon. At this moment Emlyn asked as a form of validation, that is to say that to successfully become a sanguine viscount, I similarly have to act as a potions professor, even if I'm a favorite of the moon. My dear Emlyn, I know you are trying to bring attention to the latter half of your sentence. Klein nearly reached out his right hand to pinch his chin. This was also one of the reasons why he had entrusted Miss Magician to check for abnormalities in William Street. He ultimately felt that Emlyn White, a vampire who didn't enjoy going out or socializing, was rather unreliable at present. Another reason was that he knew that he was being controlled by the Sanguine's upper echelons in secret. Getting him to head to William Street made it easy to expose the matter regarding the underground ruins. Yes. Cadlia nodded. The exchange continued, and as it came to a close, Audrey seemed to recall something. She turned her body and looked towards the end of the long bronze table. Mr. Fool, the second round of the Civil Servant Unified Examination officially ends today. What's left is the final interview. Her tone was brisk and with clear delightful emotions. It was like an excellent student reporting her results to her parents. From her point of view, the Civil Servant Unified Examination was a suggestion raised by Mr. Fool in passing. She had pushed forward the idea via inconspicuous methods, the first time she had attempted to use her beyond her powers to change reality. Therefore, she had always paid great attention to it, often reporting the situation to the suggested the second round of the examinations are over. I wonder if Benson can pass and have the opportunity of entering the final interview. Klein leaned back and suddenly felt wistful. He nodded slightly and said with a smiling tone, "Not bad." Audrey, who had been praised by Mr. Fool, became happier. She felt that she was indirectly changing the fates of many people, allowing people who were stuck in the lower and middle classes to have a chance at entering the middle and upper classes. When Cadlia heard this exchange, she couldn't help but frown. She felt that this was very different from the style the Tarot Club had previously shown. Could it be that the reforms of the past half a year in the Lone Kingdom were a result of the Tarot Club's turning of the wheels? As a young noble lady, Miss Justice played an important role. If that's the case, I have to reevaluate my views. Although the members aren't of a high sequence and are low-ranking members of their organizations, they're still able to influence the situation of the world to a certain extent. Cadlia retracted her gaze and considered whether she wanted to use her different resource channels to figure out the backstory of Lone Kingdom's reforms. After a few minutes of exchanges, the Fool Klein announced the end of the gathering. While Miss Justice and company got up to express their farewells, he severed the connection and leaned back into his seat. He silently watched the endless grayish-white fog around him for a very long while. Backlund. In a coffee shop next to King's Avenue. Melissa was holding a porcelain teaspoon as she gently stirred the black tea which had a lemon in it. From time to time, she would turn her head to look out into the faint fog. Her black veiled hat was sitting beside her. Placed in front of her was a plate of the cheapest toast, but she hadn't taken a single bite. She originally imagined that she would anger the coffee shop's owner for sitting there all this while, preventing him from earning more. But she later discovered that there were many people waiting for the end of the test opposite the road like her. As seconds turned into minutes, the water condensing on the glass windows grew thicker. Melissa couldn't help but extend her hand to clean up a relatively clear spot. Finally, she saw a bunch of people surge out of the test venue. The glass-inlaid wooden door of the coffee shop was pushed open as about 8 men and women entered. Just as Benson took off his rather old top and before he could smooth his rather high hairline with his fingers, he discovered his sister standing as she asked nervously, "How did you do? Were the questions tough today?" It might have been considered difficult for others, but it was a piece of cake for me. Mathematics is my forte. Benson looked around and saw everyone discussing it without noticing him. Hence, he chuckled. After the test ended, I saw quite a number of people with blank sheets. Do they think a low-ranking civil servant will have a mathematics secretary? If that's the case, what's the difference between hiring a curly-haired baboon and them? Melissa heaved a secret sigh of relief and looked to her side before turning her head back. Benson, if you're really confident, you should consider the matter regarding the interview. You need to buy a new decent set of clothes. Let's leave that to tomorrow. We should celebrate today. I've already decided on the restaurant. Benson smiled as he pointed outside. Melissa pursed her lips and looked at her elder brother in an extremely serious manner. I've already bought the meat and vegetables. Benson locked his gaze with his sister for a few seconds before moving it away in submission. All right, let's go home. Above the gray fog, Klein gradually found his train of thought and calmed his emotions. He began considering how to separate the true creator's mental corruption of the all-black eye. In the majestic palace with stone columns propping it up, Klein sat in a high-back chair as he lightly tapped the corner of the long model table. He first eliminated the method of seeking a sequence 4 unshadowed from the sun pathway. This was because he had almost zero contact with the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sunday. It was very difficult for him to find help from anyone. Secondly, he suspected that an unshadowed was unlikely to be capable of cleansing the mental corruption in the all-black eye. After all, the hermit Catlia's suggestion was directed at remnant influences by an ordinary rampager, and not the true creator. Seeking the help of an angel or true God's power isn't realistic either. In theory, I can use the mysterious space above the gray fog to perform a divination on the eternal blazing sun and use his help to shatter the all-black eye and evaporate the mental corruption, but the problem lies with the fact that an experienced him might be able to use this opportunity to invade this place and take over the gray fog. If that happens, it wouldn't be worth it. And when a power that exceeds my level an unknown number of times instantly comes into effect, there's no delay. It targets me, and I'll have no time to redirect it to the all-black eye. I will lack the ability to control the situation. Also, it's not like I can divine it as I wish. I need a medium. I previously used the mutated sun's sacred emblem, which had the eternal blazing sun's divine blood in it, as well as the ear that was corrupted by the true creator. Currently, the mediums I have are Mr. Door and the hidden sage. I can use the ravings that Miss Magician hears during the full moon, as well as Knowledge's pursuit of Admiral of Stars to make an attempt, but similarly, the counterattack isn't directed at the all-black eye, and I don't have the means to divert the attack. Mr. Azik has yet to recover. Snake of Fate Wuxia has yet to be born. From the looks of it, I can't find an angel to help me either. Sigh, I still know too few high-ranking figures. Right, there's also something akin to an angel, the evil spirit in the ruins under Backlund that's suspected to be King of Angels Medici. But that fellow is scheming with unknown plots and malicious intent. Unless there's no other method, I will not consider it. Yes, taking the risk isn't worth it at all. If that's the case, I might as well give up on the all-black eye and search for the main ingredients of a Nimblewright master. It's only the dust of ancient wraiths and the core crystal of a six-winged gargoyle. It's even possible that the former can be found in the underworld. In that case, performing a new search is a viable choice, while finding a mystical item that's similar to the blood vessel thief is another choice. With the gray fog shielding me, I can use its theft abilities to its full extent. I'll definitely be able to separate the true creator's mental corruption from the all-black eye, and I wouldn't be afraid that it would return. The easiest method is to throw the corrupted mystical item far away once the theft is completed. Then, I'll bring the pure all-black eye back to the real world, causing the physical separation of the two items. Well, how am I to find a similar mystical item? Mr. Hanged Man didn't say anything after seeing the methods, which implies that he doesn't know either. However, I can ask at the next tarot gathering. Ma'am Hermit, Miss Magician, Miss Justice, Little Sun, and Emlyn White all have their corresponding information and resource channels. I can try searching for it myself this week. I'll start with Vice Admiral Iceberg. Her third mate, Flowery Bowtie Jodson, has beyonder powers that can steal. Perhaps he might know where there might be similar mystical items. Klein's thought process gradually cleared up as he formulated an initial plan. He first performed a divination before rapidly returning to the real world. He got out of the decadent state of laying slump in the reclining chair drinking beverages and reading newspapers as he quickly set up a ritual. It was still 3 candles, but the difference was the symbol he drew. It was the sacred emblem of the God of knowledge and wisdom, an omniscient eye on an open book. The ritual's silver dagger also switched to a brass knife. In mysticism, the blue star corresponded to the God of knowledge and wisdom, and the metal that belonged to the blue star's domain was mercury and brass. Klein had long considered the problem of contacting Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards. Therefore, he prepared a set of soulfall ritual materials. After a series of processes, he burned the corresponding herb powder, and he dripped the extract and essence from lavender and mint. Amidst the faint, clear, and mysterious fragrance, Klein took a step back and used ancient Hermes to recite an incantation. I pray for the power of knowledge, I pray for the power of rationality, I pray for the God of wisdom's loving grace, I pray that you allow me to communicate with the spirit of Edwina Edwards, the teacher who pursues knowledge, the researcher of spirit world creatures, Vice Admiral Iceberg of the Seas, who hails from Lemberg. Klein's voice reverberated as the altar instantly turned gloomy and cold. Be it the brass knife or the metallic bottles, all of them floated up. It succeeded. The golden dream is still within 500 nautical miles. Klein first felt a sense of delight before he saw the flames of the 3 candles lengthen. They were tainted with a pale white with a hint of dark green. He knew that the soulfall ritual was essentially to free his body and allow the target's astral projection to possess him to establish an effective communication channel. He would be lacking in the necessary protection, making it easy to be attacked by the target of the soulfall ritual. Therefore, he had divined ahead of time to determine the danger from this matter. Besides, after meeting and conversing with her, he believed that Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina wasn't a person with malicious intent. He temporarily found her trustworthy. At this moment, the wind within the wall of spirituality produced mournful sounds. Klein only felt an ice-cold power descend upon him from the void in an attempt to enter his body. Then, he was surprised to discover that it wasn't like he expected. He had the necessary strength to resist and control himself instead of being possessed by her. What's happening? Just as he had the thought, he began to see a faint, formless gray fog around him. This was a trait he possessed after advancing to faceless. The power of the gray fog was able to slightly leak into reality. Amidst his racing mind, Klein didn't hesitate to wave his arm. He pointed to a coat hanging on a coat rack, throwing the ice-cold power onto it. The black tweed coat on the coat rack strangely floated up as the arms raised up, looking somewhat clumsy. It was as though an invisible person was wearing his coat. The black coat floated 2 meters forward before coming to a pause. The 2 sleeves raised up and formed an X. What does that mean? Klein was taken aback before he realized what Vice Admiral Iceberg meant. Without a mouth, I can't speak. Without hands, I can't write. This is awkward. Klein thought for a moment and directly said, I need a mystical item that can steal the beyonder powers of others. Ma'am, might I know if you have one? If you don't, can you ask your third mate for me? Flowery bow tie Jodson. The corresponding answer can be written in a letter. Summon my messenger to send it over. The black coat's sleeves spread out and motioned with a lowering gesture. Following that, it lost its soul and fell to the ground, no longer appearing as straight as before. That means, yes. Klein sighed silently and quickly ended the ritual. He hung up the black coat and used a brush and handkerchief to clean it. Then, he wrote a letter and asked Mr. Azek a similar question. He summoned the messenger by blowing the copper whistle. After the letter was taken away, Klein attempted the third method with great drive. He took out the paper crane from his wallet and carefully spread it out. He wrote with a pencil on it, might I ask where I can get a mystical item that can steal the beyonder powers of others? Putting down the pencil, Klein restored the paper crane according to its lines. He was quite pleased with his improvement at handicraft. In the evening, after Klein browsed through the prayers of his believers, he returned to the real world and went to the washroom to enjoy a rather comfortable hot bath. This allowed him to quickly fall asleep after entering his bed. This continued until he suddenly sensed an external force invading his dream. It was the same desolate plains with the towering pitch-black steeple. With familiarity, Klein passed through the doors and walls until he entered deep inside the tower. There was still a deck of tarot cards scattered here. They surrounded a central protrusion as though they were making a declaration. However, as a seer, Klein could only interpret it as chaotic and contradictory. On the protruded area, the text had already changed. The silver words formed 3 sentences. The first line wrote, "I'm only a child that has yet to been born." Klein's expression froze as though he was hearing an infant cry, "Please, I beg you. Don't make things difficult for me." Such communication is very tiring. The second line was equally succinct, "The clue lies in you." The third line was, "Don't ask me what the clue is because I have no idea either." That is to say that Snake of Fate Will Oseptin can foresee a clue on me, but he is unable to foresee what it is exactly. That feels like a charlatan's divination. No, I can't say so. I can't include myself in such criticism. Klein remembered the information and exited the dream before returning back to sleep until daybreak. After breakfast, he began recalling the items and matters he had experienced before to seek out the so-called clue. At this moment, his spiritual perception was triggered as he quickly activated his spirit vision. The skeleton messenger remained huge, but unlike the last time, its head didn't pass through the ceiling. This was because it had spewed up from the floor, so half its head was in the level below. In such a situation, it looked at Klein at his eye level and placed the return letter on his palm. Seeing the messenger crumble like a falling waterfall, Klein was taken back. He muttered, feeling both angry and amused, "So you do know some manners. You're getting more considerate after all. You've changed greatly after knowing that you wouldn't be transferred to me." Klein rapidly retracted his gaze and opened the letter to read Mr. Azek's reply. "Stealing the beyonder powers of others is from the Marauder pathway. In the 4th epoch, it belonged to the Amon family, the Zoroast family, and the Jacob family. They seldom appeared after the War of the 4 Emperors. Rumor has it that some of their members have formed an alliance and call themselves Hermits of Fate. I can't remember any further. Oh, you can try attacking the angle of the descendants of these 3 families. Amon. So a blasphemer refers to this pathway. The Jacob family was one of the 5 angel families of the Tudor dynasty. It was equal to Abraham, Amon, Antigonus, and Tamara. As for the Zoroast family, it's from the Solomon Empire. Hermits of Fate. Fate, Hermit. The clue lies in me. Klein suddenly sat up and recalled an item. It was the mysterious badge from Lenivis. The symbols on it were none other than that of fate and concealment. Lenivis is likely a Sequence 8 swindler. This happens to be from the Marauder pathway. It's not incomprehensible or unacceptable that he would have the admission ticket to the corresponding gathering. On the contrary, it's very logical. Purchasing a mystical item, which can steal the beyonder powers of others, at a gathering with the Hermits of Fate is definitely much easier than other circles. From the looks of it, this is the so-called clue Will Oseptin mentioned. Klein sat by the edge of the bed and suddenly brightened up. He hurriedly set up a ritual to summon himself and went above the grey fog to bring back the eyeball-sized badge to the real world. On the front of the badge was a symbol that depicted fate and concealment, and behind it was a ring of tiny and compact words in ancient Hermes, "You can join if you have this item." Klein was just about to inject his spirituality to activate the badge and send out the information to synchronize it with the latest gathering time and location when he suddenly turned hesitant. How careless M1. One actually forgot to divine if doing so will be dangerous. If that gathering has Lenivis's demigod senior and he uses it to lock onto me, that will be troublesome. It's just like how Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy was able to quickly find a demoness of unaging to help her. I must take precautions. A person should be rash when the time calls for it, and be a coward when necessary. Klein smacked his forehead and cautiously returned to the mysterious space above the grey fog where he used spirit dowsing to perform a divination. After receiving a revelation that there wasn't any danger, he breathed a sigh of relief and left the grey fog. He then sat in the reclining chair in his inn room. With the injection of his spirituality, the badge emitted a blurry luster and quickly condensed into an inconspicuous light beam, shooting out into the air. Before long, the same light beam returned and dispersed, transforming into a palm-sized piece of illusory goatskin parchment. On it was written the words in ancient Faisac, June 6, 1350, 9 p.m. at the Tussock River's estuary. That's another 4 more months. With this much time, it wouldn't be a problem for me to find the Nimblewright Master's main ingredient all over again. The only obstacle is a lack of money, but that's not too difficult. I now have a wealth of £6,945. I should have more than enough after selling another 1 or 2 Beyonder characteristics. Besides, there are so many moving bounties at sea. No. I can't be so conceited. I have to eliminate the 4 kings and the 7 admirals. What kind of clue is this? Klein leaned forward, arched his back, and began thinking hard. As he thought about the gathering of the Hermits of Fate, he suddenly thought of someone, Leonard Mitchell. My dear poet had participated in the Hermits of Fate gathering in Bobber Valley. Regardless of his goal, whether it's for official work or private matters, there's a possibility of him obtaining a mystical item that can steal the Beyonder powers of others. I can borrow it from him or buy it through him. This is the real clue. Klein felt energized as he quickly came up with a rough plan. First step. Place the radio transceiver above the grey fog to accumulate its aura. Second step, use the radio transceiver to contact Rhodes a few days later. Third step, ask it where I can, with relative ease, obtain mystical items that can steal the Beyonder powers of others. If the answer is very clear, the fourth step will follow what the information says, easily completing my goal. If the answer is vague or fraught with danger, the fourth step can be to ask my dear poet's present location. The fifth step is to get Emlyn White to take this badge to find my dear poet to see if he has any corresponding items and if it's possible to do a transaction. I won't appear in person, for I might end up being recognized. That will similarly make it very troublesome. As for Emlyn, he's presently considered someone from the Church of Earth Mother, no, considered a ghost of the Church of Earth Mother. To get him to initiate first contact, even if he were reported by my dear poet or ends up captured on the spot, he wouldn't be framed or put up for torture. With the plan on what to do and how to proceed, Klein immediately felt refreshed. In his good mood, he decided to head out to eat a Byam delicacy, roasted fish. Above the blue sea, the Golden Dream, which was sparkling thanks to the setting sun's golden rays, was silently cruising forward. Receiving his captain's permission, Danitz apprehensively walked into her room with his head up as people stared at him with envy. Bookshelves filled the room and on top of them were different books. Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina stood in front of a desk as she held a black fountain pen in her hand. She quickly wrote the following. I do not have similar items. Same for Jodson. He says he will help you look out for it, but that will require you to be sufficiently lucky. Edwina raised her head and turned her clear, aqueous blue eyes to look at Danitz. You, hold the ritual to summon Gehrman Sparrow's messenger. At that moment, Danitz was wondering if he would receive any special treatment from his captain, but when he heard that, he pointed at himself in astonishment. Me? Yes. Edwina folded the letter, straightened her body, and nodded. This can help you familiarize yourself with similar rituals. In the future, I'll be testing you on this. All right. Danitz hid his disappointment as he tried his best to recall the procedure as he slowly set up the ritual that only needed 1 candle. Finally, under Edwina's watch, he took out a shiny lone gold coin and placed it on the altar. After taking the letter, Danitz ran through the subsequent ritual in his mind twice before he dared to do it. He took a step back and said in ancient Hermes, I. I summon in my name the spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the messenger that belongs to Gehrman Sparrow. Whoosh! The wind howled in the wall of spirituality, sending Danet's yellow hair flailing upwards. The flame rapidly burgeoned to the size of a human's head. It was as pale as the letter in Danet's hand. Soon, Danet saw long blonde hair, bloodshot eyes, and a gorgeous head appear. Hiss! Gehrman Sparrow's messenger is very unique. How can a spirit world creature look like a human, and it's so beautiful at that? She's just slightly inferior to Captain, Danet suddenly choked because he discovered that the head didn't have a neck underneath. Furthermore, it was held up by a pigtail with a hand. He looked in a daze as one head after another appeared. He saw the headless figure dressed in a complicated dress appear before him. She's indeed a creature from the spirit world. He felt ashamed for having those thoughts. Taking a deep breath, Danet hurriedly handed over the letter and saw one of the beautiful heads open its mouth to bite at it with pearly white teeth. At this moment, Rionette Tinker's other head bit on the gold coin on the altar. However, she didn't immediately leave. The four bloodshot eyes on other two heads darted towards Edwina Edwards, who was outside the wall of spirituality. She sized her up a few times. Edwina felt herself being observed, and it made it impossible to contain the horror that ensued. Rionette Tinker retracted her gaze as her body turned illusory, fusing into the white candlelight. The flame lit up again as the colors spread outwards. Everything had restored to normal. Just as Danet removed the wall of spirituality, he heard his captain say in a deep voice, "That's not an ordinary creature from the spirit world." Not an ordinary creature from the spirit world. Danet was stunned. He knew that his captain's profession was a researcher of spirit world creatures. If she said it wasn't ordinary, it definitely wasn't one. It was far more extraordinary than ordinary. Gehrman Sparrow really is a man with many secrets. Danet reflected. Backlund, Sherwood Borough. Furs mustered every fiber in her body before she triumphed over the laziness brought from the fireplace. She switched to a thick dark blue cotton dress, wrapped a light gray scarf around her, and wore a warm lady's hat. In the not-too-cold temperatures, aside from the cold that seeped into her bones thanks to the prevailing fog, she took a carriage to William Street. She took in the cold air and told herself that this was a common excursion for an author to gather material outside. There was no need for her to be nervous or appear abnormal. Taking a few steps forward, Furs entered a coffee shop and sat by the window. As she drank the thick, warm liquid, she observed the pedestrians and the houses across the road. There's nothing abnormal. There's no fighting or theft at all. This is a place where the rich live, so the security is much better than East Borough. Heh, I can still see someone from Fasak. He's really tall and muscular, like a bear. He also has companions. Are those people from Intis? They really wear exaggerated clothes, it's like they're acting in a play. Backlund is indeed the capital of capitals. I can meet many foreigners here. Furs gradually forgot her goal and opened up a notebook to record down material for her novel. After she finished her coffee, she circled the street and left after finding nothing peculiar. She planned to come again on Thursday. After taking Edwina's reply letter from Rionette Tinker's hands, Klein watched as the messenger vanished, confirming that she hadn't asked for an additional gold coin. From the looks of it, using a gold coin as a ritual material works. He smiled, feeling pleased with himself as he opened the letter. With a fruitless answer, he planned on going out to walk the streets to find a chance to engage in true acting so as to conclude the principles. At this moment, he heard knocking at the door. It was Captain Eland. Klein silently opened the door and said, "I was just about to look for you." Eland chuckled and said, "There's no need. As long as you register a place with your identity, I'll be able to know where you're staying. The Governor General's office and the military have quite good control on the inns after all." Klein nodded without a word. Eland turned his body halfway and pointed at the corridor. I bring you to see someone. The White Agate is about to return to Pritz Harbor. If you need help or have any information to provide, you can find him. We're often generous when it comes to payment. This was what Klein had previously mentioned to him before. All right. Klein reached out to the coat rack. After wearing his coat, Eland led him straight to the Amiris Leaf Bar and to a corner inside. In the basement of the Amiris Leaf Bar, Wormtongue Mither King looked at Strongman Ozil opposite him and asked, "Have you gathered the recent intel about Blazing Danitz?" "Yes," Ozil said with a smile. "Last week, Blue Eyes Meath saw Blazing Danitz with an unknown adventurer. In a corner of the Amiris Leaf Bar, Eland found a man wearing a coffee-colored jacket, patted him on the shoulder, and laughed. Why aren't you drinking Lanty Proof? The man was in his 30s, having a rather common face. It was obvious that he had lone blood running through his veins. He had brown hair and eyes, with a somewhat high nose bridge. His tipsy appearance instantly vanished as his eyes turned sharp. He swept a glance at Eland and Klein before his eyes turned turbid again. He said, sounding completely intoxicated, "I've already drunk. I'm drinking Zarhar to lessen the effects of the alcohol." Zarhar was a locally produced malt beer. It was cheap and tasted quite good. Eland chuckled and pointed at Klein. "Gehrman Sparrow." Then, he introduced the man to Klein. "Oz Kent, you can call him Kent. Chat amongst yourselves. I'll have to return to make preparations. I'll be setting off early, tomorrow morning." He waved his hand and left without any hesitation. Klein pulled over a nearby chair and sat down. He didn't get any alcohol as he expressionlessly looked at Oz Kent. The staring made Kent feel extremely uncomfortable as he downed a mouthful of Zarhar and said, "Find me if there's anything in the future. You'll be paid as long as you provide any intel of value, or if you help us do certain things." He wasn't worried that the drunkards around them would hear their conversation, as many gangs and pirate crews would say the same thing. The words used to rope in informants were usually the same. "All right." Klein had the strong urge to ask if he could be reimbursed for dressing up as Helene to assassinate Vice Admiral Ailment despite it being paid by Danitz. However, it was just a thought. Oz Kent chuckled while appearing completely drunk. "I heard Eland mention some things about you, but I have to remind you that one shouldn't be too crazy out at sea. You need to take note and try your best not to provoke the pirates. What I mean is to not fight them head-on. Privately providing us information would be fine. We will keep it a secret for you." This time, he had clearly suppressed his voice. Seeing no response from Gehrman Sparrow, he added, "Pirates wouldn't bother with any chivalrous code, nor will they abide by the kingdom's laws and rules. Burp. If you have a family at different port cities or some island colony, they'd definitely be capable of attacking your family." "Family." Klein fell silent for a second before calmly saying, "I do not have a family." Oz Kent was nearly at a loss for words. All he could do was say, "They will also attack your friends." Then, he heard Gehrman Sparrow reply in an unperturbed tone, "I do not have friends." Oz Kent instantly choked up. He subconsciously drank a mouthful of Zarhar beer to calm himself. After coughing twice, he said in a deep voice, "They will also ambush you. They will also bribe people to learn about your schedule and intercept your ship. At sea, a single person's strength is often so inconsequential." Klein said rather calmly, "I wouldn't reject them from giving me money. That's basic courtesy." Giving money? Oz Kent was clearly taken aback as he found Gehrman Sparrow's words incomprehensible. A few seconds later, he realized that the man was treating pirates as mobile bounties. He drank mouthful after mouthful of beer, momentarily at a loss for words. In the basement of the Amiris Leaf Bar. An unknown adventurer. Wormtongue Mither King's mind stirred as he sat straight up. Strongman Ozil nodded. "According to Blue Eyes Meath, that adventurer is new. He likely hasn't been to the archipelago for long, but Meath felt that he was considerably dangerous. Considerably dangerous. Could he be the person who killed Steele Mavady and company with blazing Danitz? Could it be the person who disguised himself as Helene to attack Captain? Mither immediately made certain connections as he asked with a deep voice, "Do you have his photograph or a portrait?" Oziel beckoned to a subordinate and received a piece of white paper. "We used a ritual to get Blue Eyes Meath to draw the unknown adventurer's appearance. As you know, it's different having a firm footing in Byam's underground world than being a successful pirate. I need supporting members. To hire them, I spent quite a bit of money." Mither could read between the lines as he chuckled. As long as you get to the bottom of this matter, Captain wouldn't be stingy with her reward. He took the portrait, spread it out, and discovered a cold-looking man with black hair and brown eyes. His face was slightly thin, and he had a cut face. He wore a black double-breasted frock coat and a half-top hat. Never seen him before. It's impossible to confirm if he's the person who disguised himself as Helene. Mither raised his head and said, "Find out his identity and whereabouts." "I've already instructed my men to do it," Strongman Oziel said with a deep laugh. The two fell silent at the same time as they drank their Southville red wine. A few minutes later, a bar bouncer entered and broke the silence. He glanced at Wormtongue Mither, leaned in towards his boss's ear, and whispered. Oziel's expression instantly turned odd as an unconcealed smile appeared. He put down the wine glass and said after pausing, "That unknown adventurer has been found." "Where is he?" Mither asked. Oziel pointed upstairs. "At this very bar." Mither looked up at the ceiling and remained silent for a few seconds. "I'll go up to verify." He believed that having had some interaction with the disguised Helene, he had a general understanding of the man's abilities. He believed that no matter how good the man was at disguising himself, he would definitely feel a sense of familiarity, therefore, he decided to confirm it himself. According to his usual habits, he wouldn't have taken such initiative and would instead perform an investigation from the outskirts. Only with enough confidence would he get himself involved. But this time, he wasn't too convinced of Oziel's subordinate. If it was really the person who disguised himself as Helene, he would immediately change his appearance and identity and vanish once he noticed something was amiss. Besides, Mither knew that he was presently being punished by his captain. He had to quickly perform a deed of merit in order to return to the Black Death. Regardless if I was lacking in ability or not being careful enough, the outcome cannot be changed. I was fooled by that disguise and brought her onto the Black Death, nearly killing Captain. If it were Kalangos, he wouldn't have spared me. He has always been very greedy. He had long thirsted for my beyonder powers. Captain didn't believe that I had been in cahoots with the assassin simply because Kalangos could also change his appearance with creeping hunger. She didn't summon people to surround and kill me. She only sent me to Byam to investigate this matter. She's already being forgiving enough. Compared to Kalangos, she is truly a captain worthy of being loyal to. I have to quickly provide some meritorious service and find an excuse to contact her, so as to live up to her treatment towards me. As Mither King got up and walked out, he couldn't help but have these thoughts churn through his mind. Although he was a pirate who had killed countless and had plundered countless ships, he had a soft spot in his heart. Besides, he didn't notice that he was being constantly mesmerized by Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy via prolonged interactions with her. His fondness for her had seeped deep into his bones. Even if Ailment Maiden didn't have helpers, he wouldn't have resisted, kneeling down and kissing her toes at her behest. Of course, this didn't affect his fantasies of doing countless deeds with Tracy. If he had the chance, he believed he would take the initiative to do so even if he didn't get her permission. As a pirate, he had done such things plenty of times. When he went upstairs, Mither King followed the guidance of Oziel's subordinates and circled halfway around the bar's walls. From afar, he saw the unknown adventurer sitting in the corner. Identical to the portrait, but I don't feel any familiarity. Is it because his disguise is sufficiently good, or is he someone else, for example, Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina? She can mimic the beyonder powers of those she had seen before. It's not impossible for her to change appearance like Kalango's. Mither's gaze paused for 2 seconds before he cautiously retracted it. But at this moment, Klein's spiritual intuition as a seer told him that someone was observing him. Without concealing anything, Klein immediately turned to look back. He saw a man with short eyebrows, deep eye sockets, and bronze eyes. Wormtongue Mither King. Third mate of Vice Admiral Ailment's flagship, Black Death. Klein instantly recognized the person observing him. Instantly, 2 thoughts flashed in his mind. One of them was, £5,400 bounty. The other was, why is he observing me? He managed to find me by investigating Danitz. The military contact person, Oz Kent, discovered Gehrman Sparrow's abnormality as he traced his gaze. However, due to his angle, he was blocked by a few drunkards. At this point in time, Klein already instinctively came up with a solution. It was to pretend that he didn't recognize Mither King, retract his gaze, and get a cup of alcohol to drink. He could then secretly observe where he went, and then use his powers as a faceless to infiltrate where Mither hid himself before silently hunting him. As this thought flashed past his mind, Klein suddenly discovered a problem. That's me being myself. But I'm now Gehrman Sparrow, a seemingly calm but crazy adventurer. With this thought, he suddenly turned around, drew his revolver, and aimed at Wormtongue Mither King inside the rowdy bar. Bang! A gunshot rang through the bar as many customers reflexively crouched down while hugging their heads. All of them were extremely experienced. Many drunkards slumped to the ground, with more than 10 people throwing themselves to the side or rolling on the ground to dodge. These series of actions were well practiced. And Mither King was one of them. However, Klein didn't really pull the trigger, as he was afraid of injuring the innocent bystanders by mistake. There were many customers in between him and Mither. The gunshot stemmed from his powers of illusion creation. At that moment, everything before him opened up as people crouched down. Hence, having aimed at Mither, who had thrown himself sideways to the ground, he pulled the trigger this time. Bang! T-bang! The brass bullet traversed past half the bar, flying straight for Wormtongue Mither King's body. But just as it was about to hit him, Mither's brown eyes suddenly turned dark. The bullet made a turn, and its trajectory was thrown upward slightly as it accurately hit a glass cup filled with golden beer. Amidst a loud noise, the glass instantly shattered, splashing beer everywhere. At the same time, Mither grabbed a cup from a customer, extended his arm, and threw it at Klein. What's the point of that? Klein only dodged slightly to allow the glass cup to miss him, shattering onto the wall. At this moment, Wormtongue Mither immediately lunged forward and rolled, heading for the entrance to the basement. He attempted entry in order to get help or escape via a secret path. He had initially confirmed that the unknown and crazy adventurer was the assassin, who had disguised as Helene and boarded the Black Death, targeting Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. Furthermore, his series of actions, which had nearly succeeded, told him that in a one-on-one situation, he wasn't a match for him. This was a powerhouse at the pirate admiral level. Tap. 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 Klein quickly chased after Wormtongue Mither. He was fast and agile. Despite being inside the chaotic bar, he didn't step onto anyone. Seeing that the bouncers in the basement were coming with revolvers in hand and how Mither King was about to enter the basement with bouncers in the bar approaching, Klein didn't hesitate. He suddenly clenched his left hand. The black glove was instantly covered with dense dark golden scales. His dark brown irises turned pale and became vertical. Right on the heels of that, an invisible wave surged outwards with him as its epicenter. In the areas where the wave passed, the customers who were holding their heads down turned limp or trembled. The military contact, Oz Kent, also clearly lost his sense of reason, as though he had encountered the most terrifying thing in the world. All he wanted to do was to escape. The bouncers who had approached were no different. Extreme horror gripped their hearts as they ran around aimlessly, making the situation turn even more chaotic. Clang! 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 The bouncers in the basement threw away their weapons, either running to a corner and shrinking into a ball, or they were trembling on the spot, their crotches rapidly turning moist. Wormtongue Mither felt as though he was struck by lightning. In his fear, he began running in circles at the entrance. This was a psychiatrist's awe, also known as Dragon's Might or Mass Chaos. This was Klein's only crowd control beyond her power. At this moment, Klein's rapidly approaching figure didn't stop. In a few steps, he had arrived beside Mither. In that instant, a scene suddenly surfaced in his mind. Mither, who looked to be lost in extreme horror, suddenly raised his head and swung his right fist over, aiming straight for Klein's head. Without any thought, Klein fully trusted his clown's intuition for danger. He immediately bent down and turned his body sideways. Almost at the same time, Wormtongue Mither suddenly raised his head. His brown eyes were dark and clear, without any sense of muddle-headedness. At some moment in time, he had shaken off the effects of Dragon's Might. This was something that exceeded Klein's expectations. Bang! Mither's muscles bulged as he bent his back and threw a punch that resembled a cannonball. However, he didn't hit his expected target and instead hit the wall of the entrance. Creak! The spot where his fist connected threw up pulverized bricks. Quickly, a huge hole that seemed to be covered in a spiderweb appeared. The entire bar seemed to shake. The power of the punch was far stronger than a revolver's bullet. But at this moment, Klein had already flashed behind him. His body straightened up again as his glove seemed to be covered in a layer of gold. His brown eyes lit up with two flashes of lightning as they shot out like bullets. Interrogator's psychic piercing. Ah! One Mither King let out a shrill cry, but he didn't fall to the ground. He rolled as he grimaced in pain, holding his arms to protect his head. He soon magically recovered from the pain of psychic piercing, but he felt ice-cold metal at his forehead. He saw the cold and thin adventurer pull the trigger. At such a close distance, even though psychic piercing's effects could only be maintained for a second, it was enough for Klein to raise his right arm and place the revolver's barrel at Wormtongue Mither King's head. Bang! Mither King's pleas shrank back from his half-agape mouth and into his throat as a picture seemingly formed of blood and white material appeared on the wall behind him. It was melancholic, fresh, and messy. The luster in his eyes vanished as Mither collapsed backward, leaning against the wall before sliding to the ground. At noon on the 1st of February, 1350, Wormtongue Mither was hunted. Klein glanced around at the chaotic bar and closed the door to the basement. He chained the door with the existing chains and forcibly made a knot. He bent down and dragged Mither King down a few steps, but he didn't directly enter. As he was wary of enemies who might suddenly charge out from inside, he opened up his palm and aimed it at Wormtongue Mither's corpse from above. He had no qualms about grazing the Black Death's third mate. He believed that he was definitely someone with heinous crimes to his name. Firstly, he was once a subordinate of Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos, and the deceased pirate admiral had once massacred an entire ship. He was a rather cold-blooded person. It was simply obvious from what the Red Glove nightmare inside Creeping Hunger had encountered. Secondly, Mither was working for Vice Admiral Ailment, which was equivalent to working for the Demonist sect. It was unknown how many cases of human trafficking he had been involved in. Creeping Hunger restored its thin human skin appearance as his palm cracked open, producing two bloodshot eyes. In an instant, a biting cold wind stirred in the entrance's passageway to the basement. It constantly spun around Wormtongue Mither's corpse, slowly outlining a blurry figure with short eyebrows and deep eye sockets. Black but undull points of light rapidly surged out of the corpse, combining with Mither's spirit body. All of them were injected into Creeping Hunger, where an empty finger was waiting for it, forming a connection with the surroundings to a certain degree. Creeping hunger first went from a black color with a sinister and noble vibe before returning to its original state as it suffused its desire for flesh and blood. Klein silently diverted his senses to it for a few seconds and was pleasantly surprised that the powers he received were rather useful. Although there were only 2, they were much better than the previous 3 he had obtained from the zombie sequence. At this point, he learned that the mid-sequence Beyonder was a sequence 6 Baron of Corruption from the lawyer pathway. One of them came from a Baron of Corruption and the other came from the sequence 7 Briber. The former was distortion. By distorting the target's words, actions, and intent, he could formulate a certain order that provided himself with an advantage, so as to achieve the goal of restraining and influencing his opponent. The latter was bribe, which was one of the various powers of a briber. More accurately, it would be bribe, weaken. The premise behind using this power was to give the target a certain item, then for a certain amount of time, greatly weaken the target's attacks, defense, and control over him. Give the target a certain item. His act of throwing a cup of alcohol was considered a bribe. As expected of the Dark Emperor pathway. It finds loopholes in order while it appears domineering. It's no wonder my dragon's might and psychic piercing powers weren't as effective as I imagined them to be on Mither. Even my bullet's strength was reduced. I thought that shot would have blown his entire head up. Klein came to a realization. At the same time, he understood why he had involuntarily flown towards the Dark Emperor where King of the 5 Seas, Nast, was. It was because Nast had distorted his intent to proceed forward, making it impossible for him to stop. Not bad at all. Klein lowered his head to steal a glance at Wormtongue Mither's corpse before he went down to the basement. He was trying to find some food for Creeping Hunger. It was unknown whether it had to do with him throwing Creeping Hunger above the grey fog repeatedly, but Creeping Hunger wasn't as crazy anymore. It seemed to be able to bear with its hunger, therefore, Klein wasn't in a hurry. He slowly proceeded forward so as to be careful of encountering any accidents. Before long, he saw Strongman Ozil leading his subordinates over. There were Beyonders and gunmen, and their numbers were sizable. Klein's expression remained stoic as his black glove was covered in dark golden scales once again. His irises turned light in color as they suddenly turned vertical. Invisible waves instantly surged forward. Psychiatrist's Dragon's Might. With Dragon's Might surging out, Strongman Ozil and his subordinates quaked on the spot, as though a gigantic hammer had struck them. Suddenly, some of them ran in every direction, escaping aimlessly. Some kept going in circles on the spot, while others stood on the spot, trembling uncontrollably. There were all kinds of different reactions. Unlike previously when he was afraid that Wormtongue Mither would recover, making it necessary to make every second count, Klein had plenty of time to observe his surroundings. At that moment he instantly grasped the situation. Different reactions stem from their mental fortitude and resilience. The weakest and most ordinary ones were the ones who ran wildly. Those with relatively stronger mental fortitude among the ordinary people would run about aimlessly. For Beyonders, who had their psyche enhanced, as well as ordinary people who had strong mental fortitudes, they would circle around on the spot, trying to escape but stopping themselves as well. The strong Beyonders with strong mental fortitude would stand on the spot as they tremble or go around in circles on the spot. Those who suffer from incontinence as a result of fear belong to the escaping and avoiding group. Klein swept his gaze and was about to raise his gun to shoot, making the enemies who could threaten him lose the ability to do combat at this moment. He discovered that a man who had been trembling on the spot had recovered the clarity in his eyes. He was about to escape the influence of awe. As for the others, they were also showing symptoms of recovering. Considering how he didn't have the ability to finish all of them off in such a short period of time, and how a gunshot would jolt a number of them back to their senses, as well as how different Beyonders, when combining their different powers together, could cause him harm, Klein changed his mind and made the glove on his left palm be tainted with a sinister, reflective blackness. His eyes turned dark as he forcefully distorted the intents of the people who were waking up. The trembling man pounced forward suddenly. He could no longer resist his thoughts of fleeing. He ran straight for the secret exit, leaving his employer, strongman Ozil, as a constantly shrinking back. Klein rapidly switched between psychiatrist and baron of corruption, using dragon's might followed by distortion as he repeated this sequence. Soon, and he chased all the mentally Ozil strong or resilient bouncers to the basement. Although there was no way of comparing creeping hunger to a genuine shepherd, switching between different souls required a certain amount of time to cool down. Klein grasped this rhythm very well. He easily completed his goal while there were still some remnant effects from Dragon's Might. However, he also discovered a problem. For certain targets, if they were repeatedly exposed to Dragon's Might and Awe within a short period of time, the effects would weaken with repeated use. Of course, most of Strongman Ozil's subordinates were already slumped on the ground after repeatedly being hit by Dragon's Might. They were pissing and defecating themselves, emitting a stench. Dragon's Might and Distortion are quite a good combination. If Mither hadn't tried to counterattack, he could have escaped with Bribe, Weaken and Distortion, and I might not have necessarily been able to catch up to him and finish him off. Yes, that counterattack of his was very potent. There weren't any signs prior to it. If it wasn't due to a seer and clown's reliance on their spirituality and intuition, I might not have been able to use paper figurine substitutes in time, much less talk about dodging the strike. This reminds me that even though creeping hunger provides the combat strength of a sequence 5, one shouldn't belittle other sequence a success. A careless mistake might have me killed. Amidst his thoughts, Klein made the glove turn as though it was gilded. His eyes suddenly lit up with 2 bolts of lightning. Strongman Ozil immediately cried out in pain as he couldn't bear it anymore. He crashed to the ground like a toppling mountain peak. He held his head as he struggled in pain like a catfish that had just been caught. Unfortunately, I don't have Beyonder powers that can perform an area-off effect attack. Otherwise, I'd be able to keep the other Beyonders back. I remember that there's a lightning storm in the Sea King's domain. However, such charms are of too high a level. It exceeds the realm of my knowledge. Klein swept his gaze across all the goons before unhurriedly walking to the basement. This place was originally a market, but with everyone fleeing, it was empty. Dressed in his double-breasted frock coat, Klein pulled a chair out from behind a stall. He placed it before Ozil and leisurely sat down. He leaned forward as he observed the boss of the Amiris Leaf Bar without a word. After Ozil tumbled around for a while, he finally recovered from the pain that nearly made him lose control. However, he still suffered from a splitting headache. He was just about to stand up when he saw a pair of pale-colored eyes that reflected pale gold light. He saw a glove covered in dark golden scales. In that instant, cold sweat was still dripping from his forehead. He felt that one maelstrom after another was appearing in his eyes, sucking in all his attention. Klein calmly asked, "Were you once a pirate?" "Yes." Ozil realized that he had the strong intention of answering the man. This was a psychological cue. Klein asked again without a change in tone, "What deeds have you done in the past that violate the kingdom's laws?" Ozil didn't hide anything from him. He simply explained what he had done as a pirate and as the boss of the Amiris Leaf Bar. It included his plundering of liners, raping female passengers, and killing the innocent. This included striking down competitors and kidnapping their family members, setting ambushes to sink an entire family to the bottom of the ocean. Klein listened to all of this in silence, and the corners of his mouth curled up slowly. He clapped his left palm against his right hand and said, "What a competent pirate and passable gang boss." Amidst his praise, he extended his left hand as a ferocious mouth opened up on the thin human skin. Shrill screams resounded in the basement, but it stopped after a few seconds. All that was left were echoes. Klein sat in his seat, watching silently as the bright points of light slowly gathered in front of him. Around him, all the goons who were suffering from incontinence instinctively distanced themselves from him. As they crawled, they left stains on the ground. Moments later, Klein slowly stood up. He bent down to pick up a pure spherical light that was the size of a baby's fist, as well as the wallet inside Ozil's clothes. After stealing a glance at the thickness of the wad of cash, he put away the 2 items and holstered his revolver. He took off his half-top hat and bowed at the trembling goons in the corner. Klein checked the underground area after he was done with everything. To his regret, he didn't discover any items like a safe. All he could do was return via the passageway, pick up Wormtongue Mither King's corpse, and walk to the entrance. He paused for 2 seconds as the scene outside was naturally outlined in his mind. He discovered that the bouncers, who he imagined would attempt to open the door to provide help, had already disappeared. The dragon's might from just now made them realize that it's a battle between Beyonders, so they retreated? As expected of a region where pirates are everywhere. Some ordinary people still have a chance of understanding about Beyonders. It seems such matters happen often here. Some fugitive suddenly gets arrested by the mandated punishers. Klein undid the metal chains and reached for Mither King's pocket in passing and took his cash. He held back the urge to count his earnings as he burned a paper figurine and threw it outside before opening the door to the entrance. He then walked out with Mither's corpse. At this moment, most of the customers in the bar were gone. There were only about 8 people hiding in different spots to await the outcome. Klein surveyed the area without any expression as he saw gazes frantically retract. The only person who dared to look at him head-on was Oz Kent. He was frowning as he watched Gairman Sparrow carry a corpse over slowly. Bang! The corpse flew in front of him, smashing over a table. Oz Kent focused his gaze as his pupils instantly contracted. Wormtongue Mither King. Vice Admiral Ailment's third mate, Mither King. He looked up in shock, stealing another glance at Gairman Sparrow. Klein revealed a faint smile. Remember my bounty. With that said, he took his half-top hat, bowed slightly as a form of bidding farewell, and turned to leave through the Amiris Leaf Bar's main door. Byam Harbor. On the White Agate. Eland watched as the door to his captain's cabin was slammed open. He asked in surprise, Kent, what happened? Oz Kent questioned him with a warped expression. Eland, what kind of monster did you introduce me to? Gairman Sparrow. Eland returned with a question, feeling somewhat uncertain. Oz Kent nodded. He killed Wormtongue and Strongman without batting an eye, right inside Amiris Leaf Bar, right in front of me. It didn't even take him 5 minutes. He felt like he was going crazy. Mither King? Eland asked, but he sounded like he was repeating the name to himself. Then, he revealed a rueful smile. From the looks of it, we have to report to the higher-ups. He didn't mention Blazing Danet's nor Steel Mavadi's death. All right. Oz Kent was waiting for him to say that. At 3 in the afternoon, inside a garden building near the Governor General's office. Eland and Oz Kent were sitting in an elegantly decorated living room as they awaited the reply from an important figure. After an unknown amount of time, a young man with neatly combed back blonde hair walked down the staircase and said to the two, "The general says that since he temporarily doesn't show any animosity, we should honor the agreement and continue our cooperation from before. However, we must be careful. Send a telegram back to Backlund and secretly investigate his true identity and intentions here at sea. Also, spread the news that he killed Mither King. To the pirates." "Yes, Mr. Lwan." After receiving clear instructions, Eland and Oz Kent immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Inside the inn, Klein did a divination and counted his cash, confirming that he had received £327 9 solely 5 pence, and a Beyonder characteristic from a Sequence 8 pugilist from the Warrior Pathway. This is also an item worth £600 to £700. Furthermore, there's Mither's bounty. Even if I deduct the labor fees, there will still be several £1,000s. Heh, Oz Kent might not dare to take his cut. This is quite a good harvest. It's like a windfall. Klein thought in comfort before holding a ritual, sending creeping hunger up to the grey fog. To be frank, he felt that Dragon's Might, Frenzy, and Psychological Cue were 3 rather useful Beyonder powers that he couldn't bear to part with. However, since he had already promised Miss Justice, he ultimately chose to abide by his promise.